We found a gem last year, a gem of a place. I didn't know these places existed, but as a kid, I loved going to the arcade. It was so much fun. I would spend all of my allowance there. I would save up all of my allowance monies, and then I would go to the arcade, not to play all the mini golf and all that, but the video game consoles, the big things. That were so fun. I would go there and I would spend all of my money. But the thing is, in those arcades, you got to exchange your money because you don't just put quarters in, you got to put tokens in. And so there's an exchange of currencies that happen in these places. Well, I found this gem. I didn't find it. My wife found it. And we had a birthday party there. It's in Rockford, Michigan. And these guys who collected all of these classic 80s, 90s, 70s, 80s, and 90s arcade games and pinball machines, even from the 60s, like pinball machines from the 60s and 70s. They collected these things and they thought, what are we going to do with our collection? They got a storefront in downtown Rockford and they put all of their arcades in there, and then you pay by the hour. You don't pay by the machine. It is so great. It's so much fun. We did a birthday party there and you just walk up to anything you want to play and you hit the button. And you just play it. And I was like, man, I wish they would have done this when I was a kid. But when I was a kid, it wasn't that way. You didn't pay by the hour and then you just get full stuff. You had to actually like pay. I got this sweet picture of this classic 90s arcade. If you were a 90s kid, you understand what this means. This was great. There's an economy at play in the 90s arcade. I don't know if you understand the economy, but you have to go in and you take your greenbacks, your American dollars, your $5 bills, and you slide them across the counter, and then they give you tokens. You can't put the $5 bill in the arcade machine, right? You can't put a quarter in the arcade machine. You have to put their tokens in to the arcade machine, and you got to do an exchange. So there would be some times. It wasn't very often, but I would leave the arcade and I had 3 more tokens left, but it was time to go, didn't have enough time to spend them. Once you walk out of the arcade, what do you do with your tokens? Could you walk into a gas station and say, I'd like that Hershey bar? Got 3 arcade tokens here for you. Are they gonna take those? They don't transfer well, do they? It doesn't work because the arcade has an economy all of its own. It's a closed system. You can't interact with arcade tokens outside of it unless you make a little mini economy with all of your 90s teenage friends. You're like, I'll trade you 3 tokens for this gummy, bears or something. Then you can get your own mini thing going. But you can't actually go into the American economy with arcade tokens and think you're going to get anything done. It doesn't work that way. Because arcade tokens only work inside the economy of the arcade games. And so today, we get to talk about economies. But I'm not talking about our political economies. I'm not talking about our global economies. I'm not even talking about the arcade economies of the 90s. I'm going to be talking about the economy that God has, that God runs. So we can use the phrase, the kingdom of God. Do we live in a kingdom? We don't live in a kingdom. We live in a republic. Those days they had kings with kingdoms. And even in the medieval ages, they had kings and queens and kingdoms, right? We don't have those anymore. Would we use that word today to translate what God is like? Is God a king? Yes, like a king. But if we were writing the Bible and all the theology that went around it today, I don't think we'd use the word king and kingdom because that doesn't make sense to all of us. We don't live under a monarchy, so we don't understand necessarily how that works. So we can use terms like an economy. We understand how an economy works. There's things of value, and you exchange those things of value, and there's things that don't have value, and they don't really work here. There is an economy at play, and God has an economy. And it's separate from our world's economy. It's separate from how the economics of humans work. God works totally different. That's what this passage is about. Now, something has happened. This is the turning point, right smack in the middle of Matthew's gospel. There's a turning point that happens where Jesus has like rebuked demons out of people, and they try to say, oh, you're the Son of God. And he's like, don't tell anyone, don't say anything. You're not allowed to say that. Don't go there. And then all of a sudden, there's this turning point right here in Matthew 8 where the secret comes out, and Jesus is revealed to be the Son of God, the Messiah that's been long awaited. And this interaction builds off of that moment. And there is some strong language in here. So this would be definitely PG-13. There's some strong language in this scripture. You might not recognize it, but the word rebuking is quite harsh. So Peter has heard everything that Jesus has just said. Yeah, you're absolutely, Peter just said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Big confession moment. The hinge point, the secret comes out, the big thing is revealed, and Jesus says, all right, now I can get honest with you guys. I'm going to have to go to Jerusalem, I'm going to have to suffer, I'm going to have to die, but then in 3 days I will rise again. And so it says that Peter actually takes Jesus aside and rebukes him. That's the hot word right there, rebuking. Because when this word rebuke has been used in Mark's gospel, it is what Jesus does to demons when they're in a person. It is a very strong term. It wasn't just like Peter's taking Jesus aside and saying, you probably shouldn't say that. Like Peter is probably up in Jesus' face. He's a hothead. He's got a temper. He lets his mouth run. So I can imagine Peter is getting very heated in this moment. The term rebuke is a strong term. It's not just he's trying to steer and correct. No, he got up in Jesus' face and was rebuking him and saying, no, this is not how this is supposed to work. This is not going to happen. It's a hot moment at this point. And Jesus does this thing where he's like, all right, get behind me, Satan. Not exactly what I wanted to hear from Jesus, right? What is going on here? We got to look at this in the terms of economy. Something's happening here. There is a struggle. There is a play going on here that we need to see what's going on. And using the terms economy helps. There's a power play going on here. Because Jesus reveals, I am the Messiah, God's Son. That's long awaited. And then Peter's like, that means all of these things are going to happen. All these things in my brain, like, okay, so now we can do this and this and this and this and this. He's working in the wrong economy. He's like, all right, that means that we're going to be able to take over the world. That means we're going to be able to get all this power for ourselves, and everyone is going to be coming to us and bowing down, and we'll be the top dogs. And all of a sudden, his mind gets filled with all of these presumptions of what that means. And Jesus rebukes him back. When he hears, no, actually, I'm gonna go to Jerusalem and die. He's like, no, that's not how this works, Jesus. You don't understand. I've got all of these plans. I gave up all of this stuff, and now I got all of these plans, and you just ruined them all with this whole, you got to go and die in Jerusalem talk. Let's not do that. We're going to sidestep this. We're going to go around this. We're going to go and obtain some power. So here's the passage here. He began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Isn't that crazy? This is Peter rebuking God. Christians believe that Jesus is the incarnate God, God in flesh, God to be with us. And so can you imagine the gall it is to take the creator of the universe aside and be like, yeah, I think you're wrong. Not only just I think you're wrong, but you are way off base here. You are absolutely not even in line with what is right and what is good, what is correct. You are so far off, God, that I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna rebuke you and chew into you and get in your face about it. When you look at it with that perspective, you'd be like, oh my gosh, who would do that? But here it is happening with Peter getting into Jesus' face and saying, no, this is not it. Because the secret is out. I'm the Messiah, Son of the living God. Okay, that means that You have all this power behind you, and we're going to walk into Jerusalem, we're going to kick Rome out, and we're going to establish ourselves as you'll be the king, obviously, Jesus, because you're the leader. And then I'll sit on your left, and maybe, one of the other guys will sit on your right, and then everyone else will just kind of take up places there. But I'll have this prominent position, and I'll be powerful, and then we'll get what we want, and we'll be able to exercise over this world how we want, and we'll be able to make this world exactly how I want it to be. Because we'll have all the power to do it. Because you'll be in the position like the top dog seat. You'll have the king. You'll be up there. And then I'll be able to, and Jesus just says that's not how this works. Peter is playing in this little arcade, and he's got all this money, and he's like, oh man, we can go and spend this out. And it's like, Jesus says, no, actually, the way that your economy works with how you deal with power is not how my economy works and how I'm going to deal with power. Because power is the problem. The way that you use power and what you use power for is the problem. And so the secret is out. Peter's assumption is absolutely challenged. You're the Christ, Son of the living God. That means we get all the power. We get to absorb all the power and then wield all the power. And of course, we'll do good with it. That's what we always think when we get power. Like, I'll do good stuff with the power that we have. And Jesus says, no, that's actually not how it works. I've read Lord of the Rings. I know what the ring of power symbolizes, right? This is all built on this. And God in this moment is rebuked by one of his disciples. And it's just utterly mind-blowing to me. Like, how can this happen? But guess what? This is something that we do. We rebuke God when we adopt the world's power to do the work of God. Okay, that makes a little more sense. When we're going to use how the world does power and uses power and wields power, and we're going to get it and we're going to wield it and then we're like, well, we'll do good with it. Jesus is actually saying how you're using power is the problem. Because Jesus is going to use love to overcome power. You can't use power to overcome power and then love on the other end. And whenever we adopt power to do things, and then we'll say, but then we'll do things, for God with this power system that we have in place, we're trying to blend two economies together that don't mesh. We're trying to use arcade tokens out in the world, and it's like, sorry, that currency doesn't flow here. That's not acceptable monetary value in this economy. Like, I can't go to Meijer and spend arcade tokens there because they're going to say, like, no, you need money here. You actually have to have money for things here. It doesn't work here. And that's what Jesus is trying to get Peter and the disciples to see, is that when we adopt worldly power and try to use it for godly goals, it always goes south. It always turns on us. And it always kicks us in the pants. Because we're thinking of ourselves and this world in this moment. And I really like what Nelson Henderson says. The true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. Now, Peter is not thinking about this. It's like Jesus has got to go and he's got to die and he's got to be crucified, buried, and resurrected. He's like, but that means that I'm going to have to suffer too, and I don't want that. That means I'm going to have to plant trees that I'm never going to be able to sit under and enjoy the shade of. And Peter's thinking to himself, well, what about me? What about my stuff? And that there is what's getting Peter into trouble. So we rebuke God every time we say, yeah, we'll do the worldly power games and we'll adopt it, but we'll just use it for godly ends. Because it always comes around, swings around, and bites us in the butt. It never works. Paul says it very bluntly, that you cannot overcome evil with evil, but you have to overcome evil with good. This is how it is. You have to overcome evil with good. That's God's economy right there. And Peter is saying, I'll get this whole power structure, I'll adopt it, and then I'll do good with it. But how you get something determines who you are when you have it. So if you pursue all this power and get it and get it and get it, and then you're like, now I'll do good with it, the getting changed you. The acquiring of that power transformed you into the kind of person that pursues power. And so now are you going to do good with it? Now you're a different person now that you have it. because you had to do certain things to get it. And you had to sell certain things and exchange certain things, and you're working in this economy over here, and then you go to do good with it, and something has been corrupted inside, and it doesn't work. So using power to accomplish God's goals, worldly power to accomplish God's goals, never works, because it changes us in the process of getting it and acquiring it to the kind of people where it robs us of the power of God within us. Because we have faith in the power of the world and not faith in the power of God. We have faith in the power of dominance and not faith in the power of love. And this comes across, this is human nature, it's basic human nature to think that we cannot accomplish anything with love. It's not going to work. You have to accomplish things by dominating, manipulating, and coercing and, playing the power games. But that's the single lie that we've believed our whole lives. That we can pursue power, gain power, get power, and then turn around and do good with it. It never works. And that's why Jesus says, I'm not going to bypass the cross. I'm not going to go around the hard times and the suffering. I'm going to go through them, and resurrection's on the other side. And that's the very thing that defeats death. The very thing that defeats death is how Jesus lived his life perfectly in love. Not grasping for power, not grasping, but giving everything up and away. And that perfect humility and that perfect love is the very thing that made Christ's life like death couldn't hold that goodness inside of it. And it utterly defeated it. If he would have bypassed the power or bypassed the love and just grasped for power when he was in the desert and Satan came and he's like, hey, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world. If you just bow down and worship me real quick, you get it all. You don't have to go to the cross. You don't have to do the suffering servant routine. None of that. If you just do this thing, just real quick, get power, and you bypass all the hard stuff. And Jesus says, no, not going to happen. This is the same temptation visited a second time. Because Peter actually says to him, get behind me, who? Satan. Is Peter Satan? No, but there's a naming that's going on here that's really important. Because unnamed things have power over you. Have you ever noticed that? Like, you go to a counselor or a therapist, and they're like, have you ever noticed that? And then they show you one of the traits that you do that you're just stuck in. You don't ever think about it. And you're like, oh my gosh, I do that. I have this nervous laugh every time I say something hard and challenging because I don't have confidence in myself to say the hard, challenging thing. So I got to have a nervous laugh on the other side to kind of soften the blow for my own thing. Have you ever noticed that you do that? No, I've never noticed that. But then you get that someone else points it out, names it in you, and you're like, oh, I'm doing that thing that I do. That's what I do. I need to not do that. I need to have confidence in my voice right now. And just say what I have to say it humbly, but have confidence, not apologize for existing in this world, right? When you name something like that, then you can see it and it has less power over you because you're like, oh my gosh, I'm doing the thing again that I always do. That's what's happening here. When Jesus says, get behind me, Satan, he's not actually calling Peter Satan. He's naming something inside of Peter, inside this moment, that needs to be named. So this passage sounds a lot harsher than it actually is. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter, get behind me, Satan, he said, you do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. And there's our words for economies. You're not working in God's economy, you're working in the human economy of power. You're not working in God's economy of love, but the human economy of power. So he says, get behind me, Satan. And it's important, this moment is important for Peter because he has to see it, and he can't see it unless it's named. And this is like Peter's in therapy in this moment. And we got to be able to name the things that plague us. We have to be able to look at the things that we struggle with. If we need to be the perfect person and we never want to look at any of our junk or our garbage, then everyone else is going to have to deal with it if you won't. That's just how it works. But there's four kinds of power at play in the world, right? In this world. There's power over. That's kind of obvious. Like, I have power over you. I can do this thing. And you have no power to say otherwise, because I have the power over you in this moment. You have a boss, or had a boss. They have power over you, right? A manager, they have power over you. They can fire you. That's power over. Then there's power within. This one's harder to see, but we have built certain things in our society to function a certain way. There's power in that system. Sometimes that power favors other people over others. Class or race or money, status. There's power within systems that we've built. And then there's power towards, where, you know what? I'm going to give you power to have power over them. You ever get a promotion? Right? It's like, oh, now I have all this authority over these people over here. Those are the three types of worldly power that cannot accomplish God's goals. They can be done for just keeping work organized, but most of the time, when we use those with trying to get God's goals done, it's not going to happen. Those exist in the world, those exist in workplaces, those exist in relationships, but we're never to use those to try and get God's gain. What we're supposed to be doing, if we're trying to accomplish God's goals, is to have power with, where all of a sudden we democratize the power, and it's like, tell me more. You have a criticism of me, even though I have technical authority over you. I'll listen to that. Let's talk about that. Tell me what I need to know. Right? Power with someone is a relational power together, where it's not certain people over other people in this hierarchical view, but we do this together. And that's what communities do. That's what our church is about. We're congregational. We have power with one another. There's nobody that's like over anybody else. So those are the four types of power. Jesus is just naming the one that Peter's trying to do. You want to have power over everyone else. You want to have power. You want me to give you power. There's power towards. To build an entire structure that favors you and the people you like. There's power within. So that you have power over the whole world. That's what Peter wants. And he says, actually, we're not going to do that. So Jesus names our temptation, which is co-opting power. He names it so Peter can see it. He's not trying to insult Peter. He's not trying to bring Peter down or call him names. Or this is not a moment of humiliation. I like my friend Dr. Chris Green. He said this: in spite of what some have said, Jesus does not name Peter Satan. He does not level an accusation at him. That would be to do the devil's work for him. The devil means accuser. Jesus is not accusing Peter of anything in this moment. Jesus never does that. No, Jesus names for Peter what is happening in and through him so he can be free of it. And he reminds Peter of his place as a disciple. What does he tell him to do? Get behind me. Where do disciples go? It's like, follow me, guys. And Peter jumps out of that role and gets in front of Jesus and says, hey, I got to let you know, you're on the wrong track. This is not how this has got to go. He's like, you need to get where disciples go. So it's not as harsh as it sounds. Jesus is not like totally tearing Peter apart. He's building him up by naming something and then putting him in the place that disciples go, behind rabbis. He's like, get behind me, because we're going. And you need to come along for this. And then he does a teaching moment. He's talking to the whole disciples at this point. And he's talking about economies. We're in economies again. What does it profit? Like, is this a return on investment? The ROI of how you live your life is a little bit different in God's economy. He says this: whoever wants to be my disciple, behind me, must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? We're talking about soul exchange here. This is God's economy. And the first one is deny self and follow. Okay, how do we do that? Denying myself to follow him, we have to name the selfish ambition that is within us so that we can reject that and then let it die. But guess what? Christianity is not about deaths. Christianity is about resurrections. And so we have to let selfish ambition die to see what rises up. Not in order to just squash it and stay dead and for us to be like in this, sackcloth and ashes all the time. Christianity is about resurrection. We let things die in order to see what rises up. That's the important thing here. Deny me is not so that you don't have a self anymore. You have to let selfish ambition die in order to see what rises up out of your soul, to see what resurrects in your life when power is not at the front seat, but when love takes its place in your heart, what resurrects within you. But you have to give up that selfish ambition to get to that place, because the two can't occupy the same space. And that's why Jesus says, hey, Satan, get behind me, because we have to go and we have to die in Jerusalem. Resurrection happens 3 days later. That's something that they never seem to hear when Jesus says it. They only focus on, I have to go and die. And then they never hear, and then I'll be raised again in 3 days. Even to the point where Jesus is on the other side, and he's like, hey, remember I told you that I had to die and that in 3 days I would rise again? And here I am, 3 days, rose again. Like, remember I kept telling you that and you kept not hearing it and not listening to it? So here, we have to let selfish ambition die to see what resurrects within us. Because saving our life and losing our life, there's this paradox happening here. If you're going to grasp for all this selfish ambition and what you think your life ought to be and should be, and you're just doing a good impersonation of who you think you should be, you're never going to figure out that rebirth process of who did God make me to be. If you're grasping on the straws of trying to gain power so that you can assert yourself in this world, and you've never gone through that death and resurrection process of letting selfish ambition die to see what resurrects, then you never experience that life on the other side. And that's the hard part about hard things, is that things die in your life. And we don't like that. But Christianity is never about the death of the things. Christianity is always about that makes room for the resurrection of things within our life. So what needs to resurrect in our life? Don't hold anything back. Give up your life in pursuit of goodness and truth and beauty and love, and see what resurrects from within you. That's what Jesus is trying to get us to see. Because what is it going to profit if you gain everything in the entire world and then lose your soul in the process? Now, the word soul here is not talking about where you go when you die. The word soul here is suke, which is we get our word psychology from. And so your soul is your unique essence that makes you, you. You'll never find that if you're constantly compromising yourself to gain power in this world. If you're constantly exchanging your soul for positions of power and prominence and people to talk nice of you, if you're constantly giving parts of yourself away so that other people like you, or that your boss likes you, or you get promotions, you keep doing that over years and years and years, and you're like, who am I? That's why people have midlife crises. They're like, wait a second, I've been doing it all wrong my whole life. What does it profit if you gain the whole world and lose your soul? I listened to a psychologist talk this week. They said that they did a test on people who won the lottery. Would you like to win the lottery, y'all? That would be nice, right? It would make things a little bit easier in life we all have these visions in our head of winning the lottery and what it would be like. And they said 100% of lottery winners, they experience elation, but then after a few months go back to the psychological state they were before they won the lottery. What? What does it profit if you gain the whole world and lose your soul? I mean, if you won the lottery, I will rejoice with you, but that's not going to fix your life. That's not going to make you you. It might make things easier, but psychologically, you'll be in the same state after you win the lottery in 2 months than before. You'll be there, even if you still have all the money. Psychologically, you will return to your baseline status on the other side of winning the lottery, even though you have all the money. What does it profit if everyone gains the whole world and then they lose themselves in the process? You can't compromise who you are to get the things you think you want or need in this life. You have to become who you are first and see what lands and see what you are to pursue on the other side. Because power is always an exchange. The power of the world is always an exchange. You want this? What are you going to give me? That's how economies work, right? We got to exchange things. If I want to go and buy stuff at Costco after I leave here today, which I'll be headed there on a Sunday, which I'm insane like that because I shop at Costco on a Sunday. I got to give them money, right? I can't just take what I want and walk out. That's not how economies work. I have to exchange something. And how the economy of the world works when we're talking about power is you want power, you want prestige, you want riches, you want glory, you want recognition, you want that person to like you, you want to be, what are you going to give me? Are you going to give them your soul? Are you going to give them pieces of yourself and lose yourself in the whole process and wake up one day, maybe 10 years from now, and say, I don't really think I know who I am. I have everything that I pursued to get, but I don't know who I am. All the things I wanted, I now have, but who am I that has these things? How you get something will determine who you are when you have it. And so this final quote from Thomas Merton talks about hope. Hope is not winning the lottery. I can hope I win the lottery, but hope is not that. He has a good definition of hope. He says this: hope is a state of mind, not of the world. Amen. Because the world is in a really big, nasty place. Hope is a state of mind, not a state of the world. Hope, in this deep and powerful sense, is not the same as joy that things are going well, or willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously heading for success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good. There's plenty of that in the world. Plenty of goodness to be working towards. And if you are working towards good in this world, that's hope. It's not that it has arrived, because as soon as you have it, you don't hope for it because I have it, right? Hope is not having the thing you hope for. Hope is working towards the things that are good in this world. And then hopefully they arrive. But they're never going to arrive if we don't hope. So let's take a risk. Today's benediction is called We Take a Risk. It's a poem. We take a risk, and we place ourselves at the service of the gospel, knowing that to do so will involve us in a struggle that is both inner and outer, knowing that we have come to a point where we cannot make sense of life without God. We take a risk today by leaving this community to go and create community, knowing that to do so will put us in conflict with those who seek their own self-interest. We take a risk today that in going our separate ways, you, Jesus Christ, come with us, and that is all that matters. So send us out now. We are ready to come with you. Amen. That was from Reverend Dr. John Squires. Amen.
Please stand as you're able for our closing hymn.